My story with photography began when I was the one being photographed. This is me with my mom holding me. My mom, Nan, took wonderful photos of my family. She used a Canon AE1 program with a 50mm lens and probably some Kodak film. I inherited the camera and cherished it at a young age. I still have it today, and it's loaded with film and ready for anyone in my house, my kids included, to pick it up and take a picture. Here's one that my son Ellery took. He loves it. I love it. I think he's 8 when he took this. I'm going to leave this one up for a second. Today, I think I am a photographer. Aren't we all a photographer to some degree? I'm still trying to figure out if I'm really deserving of the title, a photographer. I'm more certain of a less bold claim. I like photography, and it's been an important part of my life. It's brought me joy, some frustration. It has shaped my attention, how my mind thinks, what I'm interested in. It continues to challenge me daily, in a good way. I find peace and beauty in good compositions and in the underlying medium. I have used photography to express my greatest love, to communicate my biggest pet peeves, to explore my fascination in abstraction, and metaphor. In the pursuit of being a better and more active photographer is a unifying force that brings me friendships in this modern age, the age of isolation. I grew up on a cattle farm in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas. And my exposure to fine art was limited. Crystal Bridges Art Museum did not exist yet. And Northwest Arkansas was relatively poor. I don't recall any early formative experiences of seeing photography as art. Perhaps some Tim Ernst photos of the Buffalo River in a coffee table book. But I was not inspired by exemplary works. Rather, my interest in photography had much more to do with its mathematical foundation and the simple pleasure of using a mechanical camera. And some of my first photos really impressed me. This was the second photo I ever took with my camera. The first one basically looked just like this. And when I got this back, I was amazed at what I had made. Look how beautiful. Here's another one of my first photos. I now know that most people are impressed with their first photographs, and generally they're photographs. Now, I was a kid in the 80s and 90s shooting film cameras, picking up my slides, negatives, contact sheets, and darkroom prints from Collier's drugstore in Fayetteville, Arkansas. In college, I picked up a Nikon film scanner and I learned Photoshop. My color slides, this is a color slide, were pretty to look at. They're still pretty to look at. Here's another one, color slide. But after getting my first real job and a little money, and without much hesitation or thought, I was excited to get my first digital camera. I still had a lot to learn, and it was nice to see my photos immediately. For about a decade, I used my digital cameras to take cat photos. Very important cat photos. I also documented my life, my work, my travels. Here I am in Italy. Mykonos, Greece. The more I photographed, and the more I studied and appreciated my own photos, the more I became interested in the history of art. And all art, not just photography. I began reading piles and piles of library books, and what I could do with photo editing software was a good complement to studying the history of art. I was very aggressive with filters and manipulation. And on a computer screen, I could start to confuse my own work with the work of Monet, Kandinsky. Around that same time, I bought a book about 100 photographers and included examples of their work. And I remember thinking that I'm better than almost all these photographers. And the image quality of my camera is better than what these people were using a long time ago. I didn't think much of the photos or the photographers, but there were a few exceptions. First and foremost, Kudelka. I wish I could remember the first time I ever saw Joseph Kudelka photograph. I still feel, though, even after seeing some of them hundreds of times, that each time is the first time. The photos do not change. I change. So every time I see something different. I still own that book about 100 great photographers. My perspective on it, though, has also changed. The photos I now believe are amazing, and the photographers, they're amazing too. My younger self had no chance of seeing what was on those pages because I was not ready. But I do not aspire to be the next Kudelka, Robert Frank, Bresson, or Ansel Adams. Well, I do in the sense that they also loved their photos. They studied them, they obsessed over them, they critiqued them, and continued to find new significance within them. So on one hand, I am like them. But on the other hand, I'm okay with my photos not having much significance to anyone other than myself and my family. If that's all that happens with my photos, that's enough, because that's so much. Photography can be a personal means to self-discovery, a way to assign meaning to our world, a way to communicate our feelings, a way to remember our love and to understand our personal story. And that's enough for me. When my first son, right here, Ellery, was born, I had so much to photograph and so much drive to make my photos better. And when my second son was born, hi George, again my motivation and my efforts doubled. Now, a few years into fatherhood, a turning point came as I realized I was feeling restricted by my material choices, my tools. It began as a vague feeling. Using an EVF or an SLR-like finder felt like looking through a tunnel. Or even worse, like there was a screen or a barrier between me and my child, and I wanted to feel closer, to see my child directly and to feel free. And additionally, I was always looking at eyelashes, skin detail, even then when that's not exactly what I wanted to be attending to. I had a large stable of Fuji cameras and lenses. They were working mostly perfectly fine for me. But Kudelka's images, his photos of the gypsies, continued to speak to me. But what were they saying? Figuring this out took me years. I wanted to, and I do now, shoot mostly with wider lenses like Kudelka. Now this is my photo. It's a 25mm lens. And there were qualities to Kudelka's images that I was just not getting with digital. Some of what I loved about his photos was coming from the medium, the 400 speed silver emulsions developed aggressively. These are my photos. I like the look of very dense cubic grain highlights cooked in a high solvency developer. The lack of shadow details and large areas of deep blacks, the absence of fine detail, the extreme contrast and side lighting that makes the subjects pop. These qualities are not the products of the modern photography movement. They're the products of a creative film photographer who discovered how to make music with his processes. A photographer who marched to his own tune. And he had some help from some talent in the Magnum darkroom. And now that I've learned a fair amount about what I enjoy in an image, could I go back to digital and just manipulate to the end goal that I can now imagine, now that I've shot a lot of film? Well, mostly yes. Right, here's an old photo of mine. I shot this with a Fuji. Right, you give me a Fuji X100 series camera and I mostly feel well equipped. But could I have gotten to this level of understanding and appreciation without traveling this particular set of roads? I don't think so. And I'm not done learning. Film in the film era has more to teach me. Shoot, I just recently watched Citizen Kane. But before I go off any more on how I love a countercultural version of photography, I'd like to make it clear how universal photography is. It's a domain that many of us enjoy and value. We value the ritual of it, the way it helps us tell ourselves that something is important, the pleasure of seeing photos that we find meaningful or beautiful, the way it introduces us to a lifelong pursuit of art appreciation, self-discovery or self-creation, and how it gives us a means to raise awareness to significant events or people. And sometimes it's just a way to play. I can relate to the common experience of photography that most of us share, and that's nice. That we have this in common, that it unites us. However, I have taken a sharp turn out of the mainstream practice of photography. I don't want the new fancy 100 megapixel camera with autofocus, auto exposure, auto mode with 17 stops of dynamic range at ISO 25 billion. I prefer the materials of a previous generation. The simple way to say it is I like film cameras, film photography, and find inspiration in the work of the great film photographers of the 20th century. But it's also not that simple. Like many others, I'm inevitably trying to integrate the past with the present, but also shape the future. I shoot film, but I edit on a computer and make my photos available digitally so anyone with YouTube or a web browser can see them. I value the way that our phones can make the practice of photography something that can immediately connect us with other people across the ocean. But I also value the way that a print on the wall can free us from the electronic pulses designed to distract us or entice us to spend money. I want photography to be a community thing, so to the greatest extent possible. I try to be inclusive and authentic. I also know, though, that photography is ultimately a journey of deeply personal significance. And most of it is for me to uniquely experience. Here's me, coast of Maine. Here's me, coast of Oregon. So then, if I am a photographer, what kind of photographer am I? Well, truth be told, I'm a dabbler. There's a lot of pressure in photography to be some type of photographer, to have a consistent thread to your work, to shoot projects, and to use a consistent style. Well, I say, F that. I dabble in this and I dabble in that. But I can say that I'm less of a street photographer and more of a get outside and enjoy the day photographer. Sometimes I fancy myself a social ecology photographer because I like to photograph people in context, perhaps absorbed or affected by their environment, with candid poses. But often, a fun shadow, or an interesting shape, or some playful light is all I need. Now, I've spent a pile of money on cameras and lenses that have ultimately taught me that the most beautiful things to see are free and available every day if you know where to look, how to see. But above all, I am a family photographer, a family life photographer. I document what is important to me, to my heart, and to my eye. Oh, and Dan Mars is only my superhero photography name. Without a camera in my hand, I am Daniel Marsh. Take care.